violent video games, these short exposure to violent media. So again, this is one thing that's a little bit disappointing for us, is that we're not together as a class, because I love spending a little time debating this, but I think it won't quite work out as well as we'd like to. We have a lot to cover, but you can kind of think about this as you're studying, as you're preparing for the exam. You know, what could be some points for and against violent media leading to aggression, in terms of especially thinking about that general aggression model. So I did forewarn you guys, this is just a little bit of left that we didn't quite get to. If I'd known we were this close, we would have pushed through a little bit more on Tuesday. But any questions as we wrap up talking about aggression? And if you're all good, let me know through chat. Just kind of send me a quick message. Just want to double check with you guys. All right, awesome. Apparently we're good and goof. Perfect this morning. All right, all right. Okay, so we're going to change now and go into our last topic, which is be talking about prosocial behavior. So we're going to end on something positive, hopefully. We will see that prosocial behavior isn't something that automatically happens. There's actually a lot of thought process that goes into prosocial behavior, that being helping others. Okay, so give me just a moment to get our slides here. All right, so let's go ahead and get into prosocial behavior. And to do this, what I want us to do is imagine a scenario. Okay, so not just a scenario of being out on the beach, but a scenario that helps us kind of think about prosocial behavior. Okay? Here's the question I want you guys to answer. You've been injured. What is the ideal situation for receiving help? Now, let's remove a couple caveats here to begin with. No, you can't say that you got injured in a hospital with experts in the area of, you know, that particular injury. You know, no, you don't have a cell phone immediately available to you, you know, life alert, things like that. Think of a situation where you've been injured, kind of an everyday experience. What's the ideal situation? What are some factors that you think would be most important, especially thinking about others being involved? Okay, so you've been injured. What's the ideal situation if this is going to happen to you, where you're going to receive the help the fastest? So if you're imagining this situation, playing it out kind of as a theoretical exercise, share with me, what do you think is the best situation to have this happen in?
Maybe like when you're at home and you have like other resources you're able to use.
Sorry, I missed that. Can you say that for me again?
Like maybe if you're like at home and you have like other resources to use, not like out somewhere, like at a grocery store or whatever, but like you're at home, you have like, if like you fall down the steps, you have ice that you can readily get easily available to.
Okay, so that comfort of home, you know what the resources are, you're able to stay kind of most comfortable, hence why when we get sick, we like to stay inside, stay at our homes where we know we have everything that we need, hopefully. Okay, so absolutely. What are some other aspects of the situation that we'd want to have crafted to be ideal if this is going to happen to us?
Hopefully, like, to not be alone. Like, hopefully somebody else would be around, so I wasn't just like laying there like dying or whatever.
Okay,
like,
so
somebody would be able to like call somebody, or at least just be there, like, so I didn't have to be alone.
Okay, so someone else is there, whether it be that they can provide assistance to you, whether they can provide support. You know, you will hear stories of survivors that had been on their own for several days, and their first objective was to get someplace where they think someone else would be. And it kind of matter if someone goes hiking through a trail and they finally find that person. Other factors you would think about if you're trying to create the perfect situation for receiving help.
I think about having other people around that are knowledgeable in how to help you.
Okay.
I had once cut my thumb with a saw while I was cutting a tree limb in the backyard, and my neighbor across the street was a nurse. So I walked over to her to ask if she thought I needed to go to the hospital for it.
Okay.
So I'm just, or if you're like, you know, maybe hurt on a trail and someone else comes around and they know how to get you out more quickly from the woods or whatever, I think, you know, knowledge is really important.
Okay. So that's a great point to make. We're going to talk about that as part of the helping process. I definitely know one of Evie's friends' moms, who's also a friend of ours, is a nurse. I've thought about that several times, kind of that it's good to know a nurse. My grandmother was a nurse. I have a strong affinity for nurses. They're wonderful people. And so with that, we can think about this scenario, and you see that some of it we initially talked about is the situation that you want to be at home where you know there's resources, the physical resources to manage the pain. But rather quickly, you start talking about, wanting someone else there, and especially wanting someone else that is knowledgeable about how they can help you. And we're going to see how kind of both of these pieces play out in terms of actually receiving help. So great thoughts, great responses. To get us thinking about prosocial behavior, just like we've done all semester, we're going to spend just a minute kind of talking about how we're going to define it. And again, this is another one of these definitions that's a bit harder for us to tackle. It's something that you probably can recognize a prosocial behavior more easily than you can to define it. So Baumeister and Bushman in our textbook define prosocial behavior as good for others or for society as a whole. This idea is that you're benefiting someone else's position, you're helping them to be in a stronger position to thrive, to be successful, to take care of themselves, to help them if they're injured. And sometimes we think about prosocial behaviors for the larger society as a whole. So it's not necessarily tied to one particular person, but you're doing actions that help others. By staying inside, by quarantining, we're making the argument, you can make the argument that we're having prosocial behavior because we're benefiting society as a whole. Okay, so quarantining has been demonstrated in a couple different ways to be protective of others, helping to reduce the number of cases, kind of turning the curve in the right direction. So we can see that we're flattening that curve by having this prosocial behavior. Now, a broad category of acts that are defined by some significant segment of society and or other social groups are also seen as kind of being a prosocial behavior. So the idea here is that this is a behavior that's generally beneficial to other people. Okay, so we have certain behaviors they have as a larger society or societal belief that we see as being prosocial: donating money, donating time, helping someone else out, helping people that are maybe in a disadvantaged position, helping those that are needing medical attention. You can even say a prosocial behavior is raising your kids because you're helping society as a whole, and this is seen as something that's very prosocial behavior, helping others out. And so I think that first definition, good for other people or for society as a whole, is a good one to go with. It's the one that we'll focus on the most, but it's also tricky because we have to evaluate what's good. Okay, so, if I, don't allow a student to take an exam just because they totally missed it, I think that that's good because I want them to learn that it's important to be responsible. I'd rather this mistake happen now in an academic setting where there's abilities to recover from it, and they learn that lesson now compared to when they might lose their job. That student at the time would definitely not say that that's a good behavior. Okay, so they're definitely not going to say, oh, Dr. Orr's trying to do this to be beneficial for me. They probably have a lot of other things that they're saying, very understandably so. So we can think about that part of the definition gets a little tricky here is that what do we see as beneficial and what do we see as good? And in this case, I think prosocial acts are a little bit clearer in terms of what's good and beneficial, but other times too, it's a little bit hard to evaluate, like the example I gave you. When we talk about prosocial behavior, especially in kind of this portion of class today, we're going to focus primarily on helping behavior. So when you're providing assistance to someone, when you're going back to that scenario I had you guys imagine where you've gotten injured and someone's providing that direct helping behavior to you. And so to understand prosocial behavior, to understand what goes into it, it's important to consider all the steps that go into helping a stranger in need, or all the steps that go into even helping someone that you do know. And I think what I've learned from thinking about this prosocial lecture and prosocial behavior is that while it might seem that prosocial behavior is inherent, that it's something that we just expect to do, that's a natural response, we're going to see that that's not necessarily the case. There's actually several steps that go into making that decision that you can provide help to someone else. So what I want to do is start first with kind of talking about the case that began the investigation of the bystander effect. And we'll talk about what that bystander effect is in just a moment here. And then what we'll do is we'll show a video kind of just explain the bystander effect, or at least demonstrating it, before we get into kind of the details of what happens in terms of decision making to help someone else out. So the bystander effect originates from the story of Kitty Genovese. And so in the early 1960s and the 60s, Kitty Genovese was coming home late from her job working as a bar manager. And in her return home to apartment complex, she was attacked. And so her attacker came, attacked her, stabbed her, I believe, twice. Kitty Genovese was then in a vestibule crying for help, needing assistance. No one came to her assistance. No one came there. The attacker then came back and raped her and then killed her at that point. So it's a truly horrific story. And researchers wanted to understand, well, why did this happen? And so the initial kind of report to this was, you know, everyone in that complex was an evil, awful person who didn't care, who wasn't supportive, and they basically all made what error? So someone fill me in. What error did they make in terms of saying that everyone there was just a bad person and they discounted the situation? It's a little bit of review. See if you guys can get this one. I know we're at the beach. You know, we're not thinking about this. Anyone remember what we'd say happened here? All right, I'll spot you this one. Okay, so basically, everyone jumped to making that fundamental attribution error. Okay, so remember, saying that they were placing more value on the people there rather than the situation. So Darley and Latine say, well, no. Let's take a step back here and think about this fundamental attribution error people are making and say, well, maybe there's something to this. Now, what they basically started to investigate with this was what's called the bystander effect. And we'll operationalize this a little bit later. But the idea here is that people are less likely to help when others are around. Okay, so I'll state that for us again, make sure you've got it. People are less likely to help when others are around. Okay, so if I get injured and I'm with a larger group of people, I'm less likely to receive assistance compared to if I'm with only one other person. And that was the argument Darley and Latine made from this particular situation, this particular case. Is that, hey, really, because other people were around, several factors were in play that kept anyone from providing help. Now, I'm going to stop at a moment at this point here and change the narrative a little bit. So that's what was originally coming out of this story. Okay, was this belief that no one provided assistance, that the bystander effect happened. Researchers then went through things and talked about it, or researchers talked about it this way, and then others started to investigate this situation. Okay, so about 50 years after the investigation, the New York Post went through and a reporter investigated the case and found that many of those things that were believed at the time were in fact not true. Okay, so in fact, she was attacked, that is true, but they did call the police. A neighbor called the police and tried to provide assistance. So a police call came in. It didn't come in immediately, okay, but it did occur. The police actually never came. Okay, so that's part of the reason why this explanation that no one provided assistance came out, is that the police were kind of covering up for the fact that no one showed up. There was several neighbors, especially one, that knew what was going on but was kind of hung up on what to do. In fact, was calling other neighbors to get advice instead of doing something. So they were providing help, but they weren't necessarily responding right away. A neighbor did eventually, actually a very small neighborly woman came out when the second attack occurred and actually scared off the attacker at that point. So there was assistance that was provided. The story is not quite the same as what it seems, but it does still demonstrate and starts the beginning process of understanding this bystander effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video clip that was nicely done by a TV show called What Would You Do, which I don't know if it's still running, but they did several kind of social psychology experiments. And in this case, what they're going to do is they're going to set up a scenario where there's a baby stuck in a hot car. And what they're going to do is they're going to investigate, well, who stops to provide help? And what does that scenario look like? Okay, so I'm going to show you this video because it's a good demonstration of this bystander effect. As you watch it, take note of where this bystander effect is happening and kind of your reactions to it, because we'll keep coming back to this video as we talk about the steps that go into helping. Okay? Before I show the video, let me pause though to see if there's any questions you have, whether it be about the definition of prosocial behavior or the case of Kitty Genovese. So I partly present this case of Kitty Genovese to make sure that you also understand that stories don't always come out as they exactly are. And again, being critical, not necessarily always discounting stories, but making sure you get all the information as you evaluate and think about them. Okay, so let's get into the video so we can kind of set up some scenarios here to understand this bystander effect. And let me know right away if for some reason that the video is not playing correctly for you guys.
A hot summer day, and on this suburban street, a mother parks her car, leaving a baby alone in the back seat. As people walk right next to the child, the cries from inside the car seem to go unnoticed.
2.5-month-old baby left alone in a hot car.
Mother was apparently inside shopping.
Almost every week, a child dies this way. But many more kids are saved, rescued by complete strangers.
Police say a shopper walking past this black Infiniti parked in front of the Babies R Us heard a child crying.
We wanted to see what ordinary people would do if they saw a baby left alone in a hot car. With the help of a dozen hidden cameras, we watched for 2 days as people walked right next to our baby. But don't worry, even though the infant inside may look real, it's not. It's a custom-made doll called a reborn, designed to look like a newborn baby. It even comes with its own breathing mechanism. And the mother, an actress hired by us. As we began our experiment, we realized right away that people don't seem to notice the infant. So we decide to give it a little help and hide a speaker in the front seat playing the sound of a baby crying. And yet, as we keep watching, we're surprised to see that even when people do hear our baby, they keep on walking. Joanne Bowman, a mother herself, hears the child but doesn't stop. So we ask her why.
You just assume that someone's in the car with a child.
So you didn't think about stopping or knocking on the window?
No, because
telling
anyone? It's really something that you would imagine not happening. You don't imagine that there's a child left in the car by itself.
Watching with us is Jeanette Fennell, president of Kids and Cars, a car safety advocacy group.
Nobody has stopped, even with a baby crying.
In the sun, a car acts much like a greenhouse. And while it's 80 degrees outside, the temperature inside our car quickly rises to almost 120 degrees.
On a hot day, it could be just minutes.
It could be just minutes, and we've got children who have died. Ambient temperature outside is 60 degrees.
This young woman keeps looking back at our car as she walks past it.
I heard a baby next to me in a car crying, and I looked over and the baby was in the car alone.
It's a hot day. Why not open the door?
It wasn't my car. I wasn't going to touch it. I was about to call my mother and ask her what to do in that situation.
We find that many people are simply not sure of what to do. But then we meet this woman.
Is anyone's car? It's got a baby, a little sleeping baby in it.
A parent is nowhere to be found.
I'm gonna call the police. There is a car here with a sleeping baby in it.
When we send our mother back in, Vicki Lefkowitz tries to be polite.
Okay, she's back, yeah.
Okay.
We were just calling the police. We were worried about the baby being in a sealed car.
But our actress pretends she's oblivious to the dangers.
Oh, well, I always leave her sleeping in the car.
You do?
It
You
takes
walk
me
away from the car?
Well, it takes me so much time to get her to sleep, you know?
Oh my God.
I do it all the time.
You do it all the time? Okay, I'm a mother. I would never do that in a million years.
Well,
I'm not judging you. I'm not judging. I was worried.
She walks away, shaken.
You're in tears. Why?
I just thought this woman was leaving her baby in the car.
It affected you that much?
I have a baby, and I would never do that.
Sorry.
I just know it's obviously the wrong thing to do, and a baby could die in a car.
Why did you get involved?
How could I not get involved?
And when Vincent Torres hears the baby crying, he also wastes no time responding.
911, where's your emergency?
Hi, we're on Church Street, and the windows are locked up. And
the police won't be coming because they are in on our experiment. But watch what happens when our actress returns.
That's my baby. I'm sorry? I can't hear you. I should be shot?
You said to the woman, you should be shot.
It's the first thing that came out. I was angry. I
feel strongly about certain issues.
Yeah.
But what do you do? Do you break the window? Do you open the door?
We call the police and they can take care of it because, I mean, we're not going to damage property.
But our expert, Jeanette Fennell, says you may need to do exactly that.
You're looking at the child and they're very red and they seem like they're in danger. I would take immediate action, and that would be to find a brick, and you would want to break the window that's furthest away from the baby.
You would break into the car.
I would, any way I could. It's a piece of metal versus a baby's life.
When this man spots our baby, immediately he tries to locate the parents.
Somebody in here with a baby in the car? Now, what idiot would do something like that?
Is this your car?
Soon, he's joined by this woman.
We're standing out here. I mean, you look.
There's a baby in a car on Church Street, in a red Volvo, and it's unattended.
Is there a problem?
Yeah, we just called the police. Is this your kid?
Yes. Is she awake?
No, but how do you leave a baby in the car like that? Locked and no...
She's completely fine.
How do you know she's completely fine? We've been standing out here for 5 minutes. Anybody could have opened that car and taken that baby. That's irresponsible.
Another woman joins in, and the three strangers won't let the mother off the hook.
Why don't you mind your own business? I don't know if this has anything to do with you.
Well, of course it does.
I'm a citizen. I see a baby trapped in a car. Have you not been reading the press about kids that die in trapped cars in the summer?
That she's fine. I know she's fine. I've done it before.
Well, that's very not
scary.
Really.
That's
Somebody
scary.
You shouldn't have that baby.
You shouldn't. That's just
totally
reckless.
irresponsible.
That is reckless. Well, God bless you, child. I hope you make it.
And our actress is about to make them even angrier as she leaves the baby once again.
She just leaves the baby unattended.
Again.
Totally unattended. Where are the cops?
I don't know.
But instead of the cops, we show up.
How are you? I'm John Quinones, and this is part of an experiment we're doing on what you should do when you see a baby in a car like that. And
That's
you spoke
horrible. That's horrible.
It's not a real baby.
Oh, I looked closely.
Why get involved?
I have 2 children and 3 grandkids, so the idea that somebody would leave a baby in a car and then just not even look enough to check to see if it was okay was pretty crazy to me.
Over here, she's an actress. She didn't mean to upset you. But we told her to.
And then when you walked away, it was like...
How did you feel?
Like I could kill her, really. Yeah. It's just not part of my makeup. I couldn't just walk away.
Here you are confronting this woman who you don't know, getting involved in something that's not part of you, really.
Well, what if it had been my kid?
You would do it again?
If I see a baby get hit, hell yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a life.
You're mute.
All right, thanks. So what are some things that you would, what are some of the observations you made, some of the things that you noticed as you were watching the videos, you're kind of processing it, kind of relating it back to the bystander effect, maybe things that kind of hit you or maybe your reactions, maybe kind of how you would think about this experience or what you would do in it?
I mean, I've seen this episode before, so the first time I saw it, I would have done the same thing as the last 3 people. I would have been calling the police. I would have been furious that somebody would leave their kid in the car. I mean, I've actually seen somebody do this to their own, like in real life. I've seen somebody leave their kids in the car on like an 80-degree day. And I was in the store for about a half hour, and when I came back out, the kids were still in the car by themselves.
Oh,
Granted, the windows were rolled down, but still, it was ridiculous that they would leave their 4 young kids in the car by themselves in weather conditions like that.
Yeah, and that's really dangerous. I mean, in that particular case, at least the windows were down. That's a good point, but that also makes them susceptible to someone taking them as well.
Right. And I mean, there's been multiple studies of kids who've been, or even animals who've been left in the car for even not even 10 minutes.
Right.
In hot conditions, like there's neurological damage that can happen.
Yeah, you're bringing in really good information. You're absolutely right. This is something that the kids can't tolerate. Animals can't tolerate it either. It's also something too that it's really easy to discount the temperature and the impact it has. You know, she was saying even on 60-degree days. It's also something that, you know, parents, you know, can unfortunately forget their kids sometimes. They get busy and they get in a hurry, things like that. So I know some of those cases have been tied to that, but it is a very dangerous behavior for sure. And you can see how it makes sense that all the parents were so irate, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm not a parent myself, but like it just seeing people do that makes me furious.
Yeah, I can understand that. As a father, I especially can understand that.
Yeah, like I have a younger brother and I have, you know, people in my family who are younger than me, so I couldn't even imagine doing that to my own sibling.
Right.
Let alone my own child.
I was gonna say, even siblings, you know, sometimes you get a little tired with them. We'd never do something like that.
Just a little bit, but I wouldn't leave them in a hot car.
Right, no way, but all right, great reaction, great thought. It sounds like, you know, it's something you've actually experienced. You kind of get a true reaction to how you'd be in that scenario. Other responses, kind of get a couple of thoughts before we'll start processing this.
I was kind of surprised that there was a couple men who noticed.
Okay, and why was that?
This goes back to like the whole stereotyping thing. Most of I mean, you hear of men and they're like in their own like space, like they're not really paying attention to like their surroundings. They're just kind of like going with like the flow of their day.
Okay.
It just kind of like surprised me that they were like watching out for like another person's child, I guess.
All right, so you might say males tend to be a little less mindful, so not quite aware of what's going on in the situation. But you can see that once they became engaged, they became very fiery about it.
Yeah, they were very furious after like as soon as they saw it, they were, on the phone doing something or trying to find the parents. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
And it'd be interesting too, kind of building on your thought, is to know if they were parents themselves, and maybe that's a little bit something that you're more in tune to it. So, you know, I definitely am more aware of kids crying at this point than I ever was. Even though, you know, Evie's out of that stage of crying all the time, it's still something that, you know, I hear that and it picks up on a little bit faster. Okay? Other thoughts or reactions as you were processing this?
I was just thinking, like, I wonder if at the end when the three people, like first it was the man who saw the baby and then the other woman joined in, but it kind of makes you wonder, like, if they would have like, yes, they might have called the police, but it makes you wonder if they would have said something to the mother if there wasn't a group of them there. Like, what would have happened if it was just each of them individually? Because I know, like, of course, like, I would like to think that I would be able to call somebody out, but at the same time, I feel like I would probably just, like, call the police. Like, I don't think that if I was by myself, especially not having kids, that I could, like, yell at somebody like that.
Right.
I mean, of course I would want to, but I just don't think that, like, I have it in me to do that.
Sure.
But I mean, I would like to do something about it, but yeah. So, but if there were other people there, I feel like I would be more inclined to, like, actually say something.
And that's one of the interesting aspects about kind of this bystander effect, is that once one person helps, it seems to be that others then feel that they can help as well. And I think you're also talking to that they then would be more likely to engage in conflict of trying to resolve that more permanently so that this doesn't happen again. And you could see too that, you know, the actress is trying to, you know, kind of create the conflict. It was kind of a TV show production, so there was a little bit of that going on as well. But you could see that they felt, you know, more likely to kind of correct her. And part of this may be that they don't want her to do it again. Understand that this is such a harmful behavior, as Amanda was kind of highlighting before. So absolutely, you see especially that once one person helps, more people are willing to kind of jump in, and even to the point of, I think, as you're saying, you know, point out to the person who's harming the child what they're doing. Okay. Great thoughts, great thinking. Other pieces to add. So I know we have a comment. People feel empowered in groups. Definitely think that they only felt the power to yell at them because they had that safety in numbers. And again, we've talked about this as groups behavior, that we have kind of strength in groups. We'll talk about this a little bit in social impact theory here in a minute, that once we have these larger groups, it is helpful for taking on these kind of greater risky behaviors. So great kind of analysis from two of the students here, from Cassie and Hunter. Other aspects we should touch on before we want to move forward a little bit.
Well, I'm wondering if personality types and bystander effect make a difference.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't know the literature well enough to know that, but I would anticipate that there is going to be that case. Again, when we talk about social psychology as a whole, we talk about as kind of person by situation interaction. So my guess is there are. I don't know exactly what they are, but things such as being higher in conscientiousness, which is something we were talking about where males tend to be a little lower than females in that regard. Agreeableness might also be another factor that you could look at in terms of that big five. But yeah, it's a great point. I'm sure that there's individual differences that are going to play out. We're going to see all kinds of other factors that are related to individual differences that also play a role in the decision to help out. Okay, so great point, great question. All right, anything else you guys want to add? All right, so let's start breaking down this bystander effect. Let's start kind of understanding exactly what happens as we go into providing assistance to others. So one of the things that becomes important for us in terms of this bystander effect and providing intervention, meaning that you're going to help someone, is simply being aware of what's going on. Okay, so if we're not aware that there's a situation, we can't provide help, right? It's a very kind of simple thing to think about. But in the case of Kitty Genovese, you could argue that there were people in that apartment complex that just weren't aware of what's going on. This happened in the middle of the night. Okay, they were asleep, they were in their own apartments. Other situations where you're just not aware that someone needs assistance. Okay, we probably all had this experience where someone was needing help just with something simple like homework, and you didn't help them with that. You know, you weren't helping with dishes, things like that, just because you weren't aware that they needed that assistance. And so we see this happen in kind of a number of different experiments. You know, one being that, you know, you can look to see around in the environment and you just might not be aware that there needs to be assistance in it. Okay, so actually, when I was teaching, actually literally this topic in my first semester here at Newark, there was a weird smell kind of coming through the vents. Okay, so it's kind of smelled like this burning smell. And what was really interesting is I kind of caught onto it and I knew enough of what was going on that we knew that we weren't in any harm's way. But I was kind of then watching the class to see how many students were kind of really aware of what was happening. And researchers did a very kind of classic study to demonstrate this idea that you first need to be aware of this helping behavior, that the assistance is needed. And they basically did a study saying, well, are you too busy to help? So here's kind of this classic unique study. They had seminarian students as participants in this particular study. So remember, seminarian students are students that are going to go on to become religious leaders in different organizations. And they were actually coming to the study to give a lecture on the Good Samaritan. Okay, so the parable of the Good Samaritan is that this is someone who provides assistance to others. It's just that good person that helps everyone. So the idea is that this is a salient component to these individuals. These are individuals who are taking on a livelihood of providing help to others. You would think that if there's anyone that's going to provide assistance for individual differences, it would be them. Okay, they're going to talk about helping others. They're in a profession that's designed directly to help others. And so what they did is they had these seminarian students come to one building, and then they were told that they needed to go to a different building to give their lecture. And they're going to give a lecture about the Good Samaritan, or they were going to give a lecture on what it's like to be a seminarian student. Okay, so that was the first factor in their study, was the topic they were talking about. So regardless, there are still individuals that would provide help. But in one condition, this is especially salient because they're talking about providing help to others. In the other condition, less so. They then manipulated how much time the seminarian student had to go from one building to the next. Okay, so one case in the low hurry condition, they said, hey, you've got plenty of time, you're ahead of time, you just need to walk over. The second one says, hey, you're right on time, you need to head over to this other building. And the third condition was a hurry condition where they said, well, just so you know, you're running behind, they're expecting you, you need to get over there as soon as you can. And in the process of going from one building to another, they came by and they encountered someone who was ill and who needed assistance. And again, this is someone kind of playing a role. In setting up the study, where do you think the seminarian students were least likely to help the person that needed assistance that was on their way between the buildings? Okay, so what do you think was the ultimate factor in terms of predicting if they were going to stop and help? Which situation do you think they provided the least amount of help?
Probably the situation where they were already running late and they felt like they didn't have the time to help.
Okay, and how about in terms of what they're talking about? Do you think that mattered or not?
Yeah, so the ones, well, I don't know. I feel like either way, I feel like the ones who were lecturing about just what it is to be a Samaritan student would be more likely or less likely to help. And then I think that the ones about actually helping people would be more likely to help, but still the lowest when they were running late.
Okay, so you can make the argument kind of based on your thinking. We can say the most likely to help are those taking their time. We're going to talk about the seminary, or talk about the Good Samaritan parable. Okay, we say those that least likely to help are those in a hurry, talking about something not related to helping behavior. All right, and that's what the researchers predicted. It's a very logical prediction based on what we talked about. In fact, they only found a difference based on hurrying. So in the low hurry condition, 63% stopped to help. In the immediate hurry condition, it was about half, 50%, so 45% exactly. But you can see in the high hurry condition, only 10% stopped to help. And in fact, they found there was no significant difference based on the topic. So it wasn't like priming these participants with helping behavior did anything in terms of actually getting them to stop to help. It was simply based on how big of a hurry they were in. And again, in this case, hurrying indicates how much time they had, which affect their awareness of this. So again, the first piece that we talk about with helping behavior is simply being aware that help is needed. So I'll share kind of a funny story related to this, and we'll unpack the story as well as the video related to each of these topics. So when I was at North Florida, I was running back. I was basically on the last stretch of the run. It was late spring, so actually it was pretty hot, so you get kind of tired, ready to be done with it. And I was coming around the corner at an intersection, and I saw someone had fallen off their bike. And so I actually made a point of stopping to help. Part of the reason I decided to stop to help is because literally that day I had talked about the bystander effect. So it was very salient in my mind. So maybe similar if you were giving a lecture on the Good Samaritan. In my case, it's very salient because we had just talked about it. It actually turned out to be a student in my class too. So it was really kind of weird and ironic in that sense. He ended up being fine. He just kind of scratched himself up a little bit. He called a friend, and his friend was going to come pick him and the bike up, so he didn't have to finish his ride back to campus. But part of why I talk about this is that the first piece was that awareness. Okay, so it would have been very easy to keep kind of running. I was really focused on just getting home, making through that last stretch. But partly because I was a little bit more aware, because I could see this kind of injury. I could see him kind of laying there, for several yards as I was approaching him. We saw in the video that people weren't providing assistance to the baby initially at the beginning because they simply weren't aware of the child being stuck in the car, right? The producers had to make people aware of what was going on by having the child cry. Okay, so part of the reason why you might not see assistance happen is that simply people aren't aware of it. Now, the second step we have to talk about is interpreting it as an emergency from others. Okay, so is this an emergency situation where someone needs to provide assistance? Or is it simply something that it's just fine? So in the case of the student that had fallen, I interpreted it not necessarily as an emergency, but I very easily could have said, hey, they're just waiting for the light to turn. It was a large intersection, and or maybe they were waiting for someone to come by, and not interpret it as an emergency. And so in step 2 of this helping process, we need cues that it's an emergency situation, that something's in fact very wrong. And one of the things that happens with step 2 here and determining if it's an emergency is this idea of pluralistic ignorance. So pluralistic ignorance is this idea that you start to look around for others on cues how to behave. Okay, we've all had that experience. Something new is kind of happening. You're not sure of how you're supposed to be doing something. Maybe you're going to a new restaurant. And you look around to try to see, well, how are other people responding? Are they doing one thing versus the other? How are they ordering? And so we all start to look around. In fact, this happens with students asking questions in class. They might have a question. They're afraid that, it's a dumb question. When in fact, that pluralistic ignorance is keeping them from asking a good question because others may be thinking the same thing or be confused as well. So this pluralistic ignorance starts to become this idea that everyone starts looking to everyone else to decide what to do. And if no one does anything, then we start to see that it becomes a problem, that no one acts. So I was sharing with you guys that in the classroom, there was this burning smell. And I looked around, and everyone started looking around at each other to decide, hey, do you smell something funny too? Is that weird to you? And it was so funny because I said, guys, it kind of smells weird in here, doesn't it? And everyone started shaking their head. It was almost like this relief of like, okay, you're noticing it too. In fact, when they work with faculty to discuss emergency situations, one of the things they talk about is related to this pluralistic ignorance, basically saying, if there's an emergency, you need to act and make a decisive action, because otherwise others just start looking around as to what they should do. And in doing that, no one acts in that situation. Okay, so part of what happens is that we start in larger groups looking around to see if others are responding, to interpret, is this an emergency? Okay, our picture here, is this someone who's in fact sick and needs emergency help? Or is it someone who's passed out from being out, celebrating too much? Doesn't need emergencies, just sleeping it off. So that's our second piece here. Okay, so we need to first be aware that there's an emergency. Second is that we need to interpret that this is an emergency, potentially looking to others for this. The third, and one of the things that came up when we talked about our ideal situation for receiving help, is that someone's going to assume the responsibility for helping. And this, I think, is one of the bigger steps in this bystander effect, this idea that with multiple people, less people are likely to help, is this idea of someone assuming responsibility. Okay, so let's break down this piece, because I think this is probably one of the more important pieces. What ends up happening here is we have this diffusion responsibility. So there's a reduction in feeling responsible that occurs when others are present. Okay, so I'll read that for you again. There was a reduction in feeling responsible that occurs when others are present. This is that idea of diffusion responsibility. In classrooms, this gets demonstrated all the time. Okay, so the professor asks a question and ends up kind of waiting and waiting and waiting, because students go, well, I don't need to answer the question, someone else will. And we've all been in that position. I've done the same thing when I was in the classroom, when I'm in different seminars, stuff like that. Someone else is going to ask that question. And so because that gets kind of spread around, no one's willing to then do something. In the case of helping, they think, oh, well, if there's other people here, someone else is going to provide that help. And Darley and Latney demonstrated this through a very simple experiment. They varied the number of other people that were in a room, supposedly with a participant. Okay, so in fact, let me clarify a little bit. Participant came in, they broke up groups into separate rooms, and they interacted with each other through an intercom system. So the participant believes that there was an increasing number of participants. So some participants believe that they were alone. Some believe they actually were there in a group of 4. Okay, so participants came in either alone with one other group member, 2 other group members, 3 other group members, or 4 other group members. During this experience, they suddenly hear someone apparently having to have a seizure. Okay, so someone having a seizure, this gets communicated through the intercom system. Of course, this is a recording that they set up ahead of time. In what condition do you think participants were most likely to provide help in the sense that they went out and found the experimenter to say, hey, something's wrong? Okay, how many other participants do you think were there, needed to be there for the participant to then provide assistance? Do you think it was better to have fewer other participants or a larger number of other participants? Okay, especially think about this diffusion responsibility principle.
A smaller number of participants.
Okay, and why is that?
Because you're less likely to think that, oh, somebody else is gonna like go and tell somebody, or somebody else is gonna handle the situation.
Okay, so perfect, you nailed it. Okay, in fact, as that group got larger, people were less likely to provide help. When it was only the participant and the person having the seizure, there was a greater likelihood that that participant went out and found the experimenter say, hey, something's wrong. And again, exactly for the way that you were explaining it, the idea here was that no one else is there. When there's a larger group, though, they say, well, someone else might, know what's going on, be likely to provide that assistance. I'm not the one who's responsible for doing this. And I'll share kind of the principle this is based on. I'll share with you part because it's kind of one of my favorite theories overall. It's called social impact theory. It was developed by Bib Latney. I believe Darley was involved with it a little as well. And there's multiple components of this social impact theory, but we'll talk about it in terms of diffusion responsibility. And the idea behind this social impact theory is that there's kind of these psychological forces that act on us. And in the case of our situation here with social impact theory, we talk about this as a division of impact. So when there's more than one target, the impact should be divided collectively among the targets. So the idea here being that when there's one source, in this case, potentially someone needing help, then the impact of that source then gets spread across all the other targets, all the other people that could provide assistance. Okay, so we see this in the classroom as well. The source is the professor asking a question. The impact, meaning someone having to answer that question, gets dispersed among all the classmates. We can see this too in terms of getting a bad grade. You start to kind of say, well, hey, we can take all that negativity of getting a bad grade in a group situation and kind of spread them out among others. So with social impact theory, there's, again, multiple other pieces. We talk about strength, immediacy, and number. Here we're talking a little about number in terms of diffusion responsibility. If that source is farther away, the social impact of the source is farther away versus closer. So if that person's injured closer to you versus farther away is also going to have an impact. And then that strength, so how strong is that psychological force? So you don't need to know the ins and outs of social impact theory, but I think it's an interesting one. It's kind of what we label kind of more of a meta theory, which a larger theory kind of organizing other principles. And in this case, it helps us organize the principles behind this bystander effect, this idea that that psychological impact of someone needing help gets dispersed among all the others. All right, so I want to keep us going here, kind of working through each of these steps. We talked about first, you need to be aware that there's a situation. The second is that you need to see that situation as an emergency. Okay, so you might be aware someone is in a situation, but you don't necessarily interpret it as emergency. You then need to assume responsibility. So that's what we're talking about here. Our fourth piece is then knowing how to help. And this becomes another critical piece. And again, one that got raised right away at the beginning with our scenario. And in this case, there's a very simple study demonstrating how having the resources, having the knowledge to help provides greater assistance. So researchers brought psychology students and nursing students into the research lab. And the idea here is that they were going to see what happens between these two groups when apparently, supposedly, someone falls off a ladder. Okay, so there's an electrician working outside of the lab. They staged it so it sounded like the electrician was falling off the ladder. And they want to see who is more likely to help, the psychology students or the nursing students. And as you probably could imagine, okay, the nursing students were faster to help and more likely to help compared to the psychology students. And the argument here, and what the support of this idea of needing to know how to help, was that the nursing students were better equipped to provide that assistance. Okay, both in terms of the medical help, caring for that person, getting assistance, compared to the psychology students who weren't medically trained. Okay, so part of this is that knowing how to help becomes a key piece. When the student fell, it was very easy to know how to help. Okay, basically just check on him. We could kind of assess things from there. We've all fallen off our bikes. We know how to do that. In the case of the child stuck in the Volvo, the car, it was pretty clear how to help. Okay, try to find the mother, call 911. There's a pretty clear way of assisting, especially parents that have kids that kind of know, how these things work a little bit more. So they're likely to know how to help. They had that past experience. Now, the last piece to this, and it's hard to believe that there's 5 steps to this, and we're still not quite there, is that we actually have to help. Okay, so you have to be aware, interpret as emergency, assume responsibility, know how to help, know how to provide assistance. Okay, and remember, we know how to help. Calling 911 is something you can always do. The last piece is actually providing that assistance, actually helping. And here's where we still may get hung up in terms of providing that assistance. What we see actually happens in this stage here is that there's audience inhibition. An idea here is failure to help in front of others for fear of looking like a fool if someone's offer is rejected. Okay, so failure here to help someone else because they're afraid that that offer for help is going to get rejected by the person they believe needs help, and they don't want to look foolish. Okay, we never want to look foolish. It's always a hard thing for us to do. And so you can think about this as a scenario. You're with friends, you see someone sitting on a park bench that doesn't look so good. You go over to offer them help. Person on the park bench says, yeah, I'm totally fine. Why are you bothering me? You then are in front of your friends and, suddenly you feel foolish. You don't want to provide that assistance because you don't want to be embarrassed. And this may be where we start to see some of these individual differences come in terms of shyness, extroversion in terms of willing to be a fool, to reach out to that person, the degree of embarrassment individuals are willing to kind of endure or experience. They're concerned here about being embarrassed. And then anxiety. So individuals who are higher in this anxiety are probably less likely to help because they don't want to seem foolish in front of others. And so it may be the case that someone seems like they might need help, but you don't want to be that person that provides assistance. And then the person's like, yeah, I'm totally fine. I didn't need any help. And that person may say they don't need any help because they're embarrassed themselves. They don't want that assistance. Maybe they did something foolish to harm themselves. we can see that it comes down to that you still have to decide that you are going to help. Okay, keep in mind, with all these things, you can still call 911. That's always an option. So putting this all together, we can see that there's quite a number of steps that actually go into providing assistance, providing help. So let me pause at this point to see if you have any questions about any of these steps. So we covered quite a bit. Let me pause here to see if you have questions about it. Okay, so as you're studying, as you're processing this, maybe think of an experience where you thought about providing help, maybe you did provide help, and kind of walk your way through it. Use the video we talked about as well. You know, people walking by had to be aware. They had to interpret it as an emergency. They had to know that having a kid in the car like that was an emergency. We saw the first younger woman that came by. She didn't necessarily see it as an emergency. Assuming responsibility, so saying, hey, you're going to help. Knowing how to help. You can see that people that seem more confident seem to know how to help and actually providing that assistance. Now, what I'm going to do is talk about, okay, well, what do we do when we have been injured? Okay, so you have been injured. What are you going to do to get help? So let's imagine, again, you're in a scenario where, fortunately, you've gotten harmed. What do you think are some of the things that you might do to get assistance? And then, again, imagine that you don't have a cell phone. You don't have immediate access to just calling someone. What are some of the things that you do if someone was around to try to provide help for you? What were some of the things that you do to try to get them to provide assistance to you? Okay, keeping in mind that you now know about this bystander effect.
I mean, if you see somebody around you, you would say, like, hey, can you help me? Or something like that.
Okay, so you're going to directly ask them, hey, can you help me? Okay, you can provide assistance for me. Okay, what are some other things kind of related to that you might do? Okay, so great starting point for us. All right, Cindy's jumping in saying, single someone out. And be specific about what you need. I think that's a key piece. Both of those are key pieces, and we'll unpack this in just a second. The idea here is that you do need to single someone out. Okay, we'll talk about why, and you do need to then say specifically what you need. Okay, so let's talk about this. And here's the phrase that pays. Okay, you guys know anytime I say the phrase that pays, it's a good thing to make sure that you're taking specially note of. So you might use a sentence such as this. Okay, you in the red sweatshirt, I need help, call an ambulance now. So you in the red sweatshirt, I need help, call an ambulance now. Okay, and obviously if you're in this situation, you would adapt it to whatever's going on. But the idea behind this simple sentence is that it eliminates 3 of the obstacles we talked about earlier in terms of receiving help. Okay, so let's break this down, and I'm going to have you guys evaluate this sentence as to why it eliminates these obstacles. So let's start first with the first part of the clause. You in the red sweatshirt. Okay, by saying you in the red sweatshirt, what aspect are we addressing in terms of the bystander effect? That we're trying to make sure that this aspect doesn't kick in so that you get help. Okay, so you flip back to your notes. What piece are we addressing in the steps of helping when we say you in the red sweatshirt?
Diffusion of responsibility.
Okay, and why is that? So you're absolutely spot
on. Because the person is making that person in particular responsible. And that even regardless of whether or not people are around, they've called them out specifically.
Okay, so great, you've got it. It works on that first principle, diffusion of responsibility. So now the diffusion is no longer there. Now it's specifically on that person in the red sweatshirt to provide assistance. Okay, so they can't look to someone else. You can't just kind of pass it off as, well, let's see what happens. Okay, so absolutely. In fact, we started watching Royal Pains a little bit, and the main character is a doctor. An emergency situation happens, and he does exactly this. Okay, so he's providing help to the person, but he literally turns to someone else and says, "You need to call 911." It was great modeling of this behavior when you need assistance, because that diffusion responsibility immediately was removed. Okay, so that first part, you in the red sweatshirt, addresses this diffusion responsibility. Now those psychological forces we talked about in social impact theory are directed to one person. That one person needs to provide assistance. Let's tackle then the next piece here. Okay, so I need help. Why is it important to say I need help? What does this address in terms of the different steps we talked about for helping?
You're giving the cue that you're the one that you need the help and the help is needed.
Okay, So perfect, especially that last piece there is saying that help is needed. Okay, so now we're saying, hey, this is an emergency. I do need help. And that's, in this case, removing that pluralistic ignorance. Okay? You've now been given specifically a cue that help is needed. It's not ambiguous. You're not trying to guess at what's going on. You know specifically that help is needed. Okay? And so that's why it's important to say, I need help. And that was one of the things that came up when we were initially thinking about this question, is saying, hey, you need to identify to someone else that they need help, and you need to identify who needs the help. Okay, so Cindy was kind of suggesting to us, even being specific as to what you need. I need you to call 911, or I need my inhaler. It's in my purse that's fallen away from me, or something like that. Now we have the last piece of this phrase here. Okay? Call an ambulance now. What does this do? Okay, what aspect of it does it address?
The fact that people know how to help. Like anybody can do that because they know what to do because you told them what to do.
Okay, so perfect. It gets to this point of saying, well, now you know how to help. So you've kind of empowered them. You made them an expert by saying exactly what needs to get done. You've also said in this case how to provide help. This addresses that audience inhibition. Okay, so instead of someone kind of being like, I'm not sure if you need help, I don't want to embarrass myself. What should I do? You seem like something's wrong. Now you know exactly what's going on, and that person's asking you for that help. They're not going to reject you if you provide that assistance, if you call an ambulance for them. Okay, so I've told you exactly how to provide help, so you shouldn't feel like a fool if you're then providing exactly that assistance. So we can see how the bystander effect occurs. We can see how there's many steps that go into helping. We can see how if we need assistance, we have to be rather direct and very clear in terms of how we ask for that assistance. What we need and how we need it. So this is an important phrase, should you get into an emergency situation? I sure hope not, but to understand how to help with things. You also can reverse this a little bit. You can say, do you need help? Okay, do you want me to help? You can ask those kind of questions as well. That also helps with kind of, taking this phrase that pays, kind of reversing itself a little bit. Okay, so I'm here to help. Do you need assistance? So let me pause here after we've gone kind of through this phrase that pays, see if you guys have any questions that I can go through, things I can address. So in the last piece of talking about the bystander effect, I want to address some more recent research that's come out that is starting to address, could the bystander effect be a myth? Okay, so I always want you guys to be critical of the research that we've talked about. That's an important piece of being a good consumer of research, is say, well, really, is this the case? And so I can show you a video that starts to raise the question, is the bystander effect really a myth? Okay, so let me go ahead and set this up for you guys.
Of us being individuals that are only interested in our own interests, that is not how it works. The myth is that when people observe somebody in need of help in public, then they have a tendency to kind of just stand there and look at each other. Our research shows that that's not at all what's happening. From pretty low-scale conflicts to stabbings and really severe violence. In all types of situations, they try to de-escalate the conflict. They put themselves between the conflict parties, trying to pull them apart. So is it always a good idea to play an active role, Is it also a good idea to be active if you are in an armed robbery situation? We were surprised by the high frequency of it, and we were also surprised by seeing similar frequencies in these 3 different countries that we looked at. as a cultural anthropologist, I would have expected pretty big cultural differences. But what we see is that there are some universal features in these very tense situations. A lot of social psychologists would be pretty upset if I would say that I disproved it. In many ways, I think we did, but the point is that they've been looking at something else than what we've been looking at. So our point now is a bit, now with the CCTV footage, we can actually gain understanding of human behavior in a way that we haven't been able to get before. Violence and aggression, you can't study that in a lab setting. The urgency is different in real life. So that idea, if you stumble when you enter the subway and people will not help you, I mean, that's not what we see. That's an idea that we all have, but that's not how the reality works.
All right, so as we evaluate that, it's shown for two reasons. I show it because, one, we always want to be critical of research and theory. Okay, so even if something's been in the literature for quite some time, you always want to be consistently thinking about it. We also want to take research like this and go, well, why are we finding it in the lab, but they're suggesting other evidence? Okay, so I want you guys to think about that a bit, kind of on your own and process it. Why are they finding effects and saying maybe the bystander effect doesn't occur compared to what social psychologists are doing? And I'll list kind of two things that have occurred to me. One is that you have different approaches towards the research, so maybe there's a little bit in that. The other thing too is that if you go through and you carefully read the textbook, they'll talk about how when the situation is clearer that there's an emergency, people are more likely to provide assistance. Okay, and so we see here that the examples of the CCTV footage, so this is cool that they looked at closed caption TV, or closed circuit TV, I should say, that these are incidences that were pretty clear that someone needed assistance. Okay, so someone, fell off the train tracks, someone's being attacked. What about kind of more subtle situations, such as someone falling off a ladder? Okay, maybe that's where the bystander effect is more likely to occur, when there's ambiguity whether it's an emergency or not. So there's a couple pieces I want to do to kind of wrap us up. We have just a few minutes left. Let me kind of take us to kind of the summation that I want to make sure that we have in terms of wrapping up social psychology, and then kind of checking in with you guys here. So as we pull the course together, what I want you guys to keep in mind always is the ABCs of social psychology. So our affect, behavior, and our cognition. If we want to understand why people act a particular way, if we want to interpret our own responses, think about our emotions, examine the behavior that happens, and think about that cognition. So how are people processing the information that's going on? What is their mindset going into different situations? Everything we've talked about throughout the entirety of the class has come back to these three components in some fashion or another. Okay, so we just got done talking about prosocial behavior. We know that feel good leads to doing good things. We know cognition, in terms of being primed to think about helping others, provides greater assistance. All three of those components come back immediately to the things we just talked about today. To understand any kind of outcome, even very complex outcomes, think about both the person and the situation. I'm working with research assistants, with other faculty, thinking about political outcome decisions. And we've been very good about thinking about the fact that we might attribute certain political decisions to the person and their characteristics, but a lot of these things are related to just simple group dynamics. So there's a lot of situational factors that are influencing this outcome. If you're trying to understand something going on in your life, why that employee is showing up late, why someone's not motivated to do well in sales, how things are working online in the classroom versus, when we're actually in person, think about both that person and situation. Okay? And lastly, the basic concepts of social psychology. Use them. Okay? Use them to interpret the world around you. Use them to help make the world better around you. Use them to then influence others in positive ways. Use these concepts, be aware of these concepts. I think when you take a moment to take a step back and think about it, you've learned a ton about social psychology. You've learned a ton about how people operate. Use these principles to understand those outcomes. Okay? Lastly, kind of more on a personal note, I want to say you guys are rock stars for being here at 8 o'clock in the morning online, rolling out of bed at 7:55 in some cases to be here, staying with class. I very much appreciate it. I know you guys are dealing with a lot of different things going on in your own personal lives, and I know are very hard to deal with. I'm doing the same thing, but you've been rock stars. I want to say, in terms of the larger picture of things, continue to take classes, continue to keep going on with your college education. this is an experience that hopefully will be a blip in your lifetime, that the virus does go away, we're able to manage it. But your education, your college education will last for a lifetime. So stay with your classes, keep hanging in there, keep doing a great job. I know several of you might not have been able to be in class, but you're watching the videos, staying on top of things that way. I appreciate that as well. So I just want to say, again, thank you to you guys. I've enjoyed having class with you. I appreciate you guys making this transition with me, bearing with all the different things going on. I will stop at this point one last time to see if there's any last questions, things I can address for you guys before we'll call this a wrap on things. All right. I will hang out a little bit after class in case there's something you want to check in with me on. Again, I'll release the exam next Thursday, so you have 24 hours to complete it. I'll also be in a Zoom meeting at 8 o'clock before the final in case you need to check in with me on anything. If you guys need help with anything, whether it be class or even after class, if you're, something stressing you, something I can help you out with, whether it be academic or not, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm very happy to help you guys. So again, I appreciate it. I will catch you guys later.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Worth.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely.